What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives, it fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops, and then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50. BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I'm your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you not from the usual place, Lockhart, Texas, my studio. I'm actually traveling. I'm up in Pennsylvania. So if for whatever reason this intro recording sounds different than normal, that's what it is. But as I always say on the ad for this show, that's on this show, you understand my guys at Podsworth are the best, so you might not even be able to tell this is a different situation. So let's get to who I've got today. Auron MacIntyre is back on this show, and I'm very happy to get Oren back on. He's been busy. He's blown up since the last time he was on this show. He's doing great work over there at The Blaze, and he does a lot of good content on Twitter, it's on YouTube, and we're just lucky to have someone like him at The Blaze, a very big platform. And Oren is very good at breaking down and analyzing a lot of political issues, and that's what we're doing today. You guys understand that the left, politically, they control a lot of the narrative in this country, and that's all a lot of people know, unfortunately. For instance, when you talk about climate change, they kind of own that, so it makes the right look like, well, we don't care about the environment at all. Or this thing about banned books that the left likes to pretend that they don't like doing that. They kind of own that narrative too, unfortunately. So we're going to get into that, how they own the narrative and how the right often is kind of the backseat driver, so to speak, trying to just react to whatever the left puts out there as the narrative, the problems that entails, and maybe how to fix that. So let's get right to it now. Auron MacIntyre, welcome back to the show, sir. How are you?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Well, since last time I had you on, you were already a big account last time, your content, your Twitter, etc. But there's been a massive increase and a lot of big things have happened for you, which is wonderful to see from my perspective, because it's like we get a real voice on a big platform now. First, give you a little intro for yourself and then kind of talk about what's been happening with the Blaze and all of these things.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been doing YouTube for a few years now, been on Twitter, kind of started in journalism background and then that in education, and kind of fell backwards into now kind of doing the news commentary. Yeah, it's been a while since the last time we come on. I was still kind of doing everything part-time along with my real job, just trying to fit it in on the weekends and that kind of thing. And then I got picked up by the Blaze, and so now it's kind of my full-time gig, which has been very surreal. Went from having a very normal job in life to kind of being in a very different place. So it's been exciting, but it's been surreal.
Yeah, and it feels like I'm always scared when someone gets the success that you're getting from our corners. I will say that they're going to change a little bit, or they have to be more palatable to a mainstream. But it doesn't feel like you've had to do that. Does it seem like you still get to be yourself in your eyes?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've all credit to the Blaze. I've got nothing but green lights on the guests I want to have, the pieces I want to write. I've never been told not to write about something, have somebody on, talk about something. It's been completely open, and they've even had me on to do commentary with the Republican Party, forum and everything. So it's been really great. They've been very welcoming, and I think there's a sea change, kind of coming. I think a lot of people can kind of read the tea leaves and understand that that's something different, especially after everything that happened with Trump. I think a lot of people know something different is really what a lot of the audience is looking for. And so I think, they've been willing to embrace that, which has been great.
Excellent. Well, that's good. You have been putting out a lot of content, which is great. And I love you've got some shorter pieces that are, quickly digestible and whatnot. And one of the pieces, or a few of them we're going to talk about today, it was something that was it spoke to me greatly, because a lot of us understand this, but the left is very, very good at controlling the narrative, the language. And I want to get into some of the weeds on things like climate change and these banned books of sorts. But can you broadly speak on how you see it as how the left controls the narrative and why that's so impactful? And at times it feels like we're kind of in the back seat as the quote unquote reactionaries.
Yeah, it's something I didn't really understand. I was in politics. I worked a little bit in politics, but it's not something that I really understood until I ended up in journalism. I would go to press gaggles with the governor, and then one person would ask a question and the governor would give a particular answer, and that person would completely shift the thing that the politician said and completely change the story on the spot right there. And even though the thing they said was provably untrue, the fact that they had said it first and that it had already gotten the impact that it needed meant that was the story, and that set the climate. And not only did people do this regularly, but they got rewarded for it. The people who were willing to go out and manipulate the news and shape the stories, they were the ones who got promoted. Politico picked them up, those kind of things. They were the ones who were succeeding. And so it became very clear that what mattered for the most part was not what actually happened, what the government actually did, or what the politician really said, but it was the way in which the narrative was shaped. Like once that public perception of an event imprinted, it became very permanent. And the people who were creating that were not oblivious to that fact. Like they understood the machine that they were operating. And so, when I started doing what I'm doing now, I tried to always kind of bring that understanding when I look at an issue. So when I see the way that the left is talking about something, the way the language they're using, the perspective they're using, I always assume it's for a reason. It's not just because it's the reality of the situation. It's not just because that's what they believe, though oftentimes it is. It's not just cynical. They often believe this stuff. But I assume that there's a purpose, there's a functionality to the language, to the frame, to the setting, to the perspective they're bringing. Even things that seem innocuous, like story selection, right? They're just picking what to talk about. But no, they're picking what to talk about because it specifically serves a purpose. And so I think the right just looks at things like, we're going to go in and have a debate. We're going to go in and talk about these things because, we have the best ideas and we're going to win the marketplace of ideas. As the left knows that the best thing, the way to win in a market is to monopolize it, to own the market. And so they come in and they say, actually, we're going to pick what we talk about. And then, you might have good ideas, you might have good arguments, but you're already fighting in the place we want you to fight on the ground, the issues we want you to fight about. And that's really what I think puts the right on the defensive all the time.
Yeah, I have this picture, this mental image of the left. It's like a football field. The left designs the field, picks the players on their side, picks the referees, and makes the rules. And the right's like, all right, let's play ball, guys. And it's like, well, you have no chance of winning this. It's funny, but it's brilliant on their side. I will say that. Have you seen the right at all starting to figure this out and attempting to gain the upper hand at all in this?
I wouldn't say gain the upper hand, but I would say that there are those who now realize that Chris Rufo is probably the best example of somebody who is laser focused on language, use of language, framing tactics, how to take the fight to the left and put it into the perspective he wants. I don't always agree with some of the ways that Rufo chooses to engage with issues, but he knows what he's doing. He's intentional about his tactics. He grasps the importance of language. And so I think there are people who are waking up to this reality, understanding that. I'm hoping to do my best to bring that awareness. It's one of the things I try to do whenever I interact, is like bring that, not just arguing the nuts and bolts of an issue, but specifically saying, actually, that's not how you want to approach this. So I hope that's seeping through into the wider consciousness. But I do think there are people, Rufo, I do think there are people at the Claremont Institute who kind of grasp this nature of the battlefield.
One of the brilliant tactics they've done on the left is control the narrative around quote unquote climate change. In fact, I think you and I are close to the same age. When we grew up, it was global warming. And then as all of their predictions, like Al Gore's movie, didn't come true, let's change the words really quick to climate change. You can't argue with that. Who's going to say the climate can't change? And it's a brilliant tactic, and it unfortunately pushed some on the right to almost react against that in a what I call like vice signaling rather than virtue signaling. It's like, well, I don't care about the environment at all. And I think that's a failed tactic as well. Can you get into really the sad brilliance of them controlling a word or a phrase, like climate change?
Yeah, it's really a brilliant piece of linguistic technology, and that's what we need to see these things as. They are constructs that have been hollowed out of kind of their real meaning, any contextual meaning, and they have been charged with political energy. My buddy, the YouTuber Dave the Distributist, calls these magical words.
Yes,
they're words that have been vacated of any actual contextual meaning inside the culture in any kind of conversation. Whenever someone uses them, they're not using them to discuss a distinct idea, something that's discrete. Instead, they're using it as a shibboleth, a signal, all of the emotion, all of the political energy that has been stored into that word. And so climate change is kind of perfect here because, like you said, you had global warming, and you could argue different aspects of global warming, about whether or not they were occurring, about whether they are caused by man, about all these things, right? But it was at least a specific charge. The globe is getting hotter. The globe getting hotter is bad and has detrimental effects. We can measure these things. We can make predictions, and those things can be true or false. But like I said, climate change is always true, right? The climate has always been changing. That was changing on Earth before humanity existed. It'll change on Earth after humanity, if that's how things go. Like that, the climate of planets changes. That's what they do. They're not some perfect stasis. And so by making this term that is implicitly true and factual, and by hollowing it out of that and replacing that truth with all of your political energy, now you can push forward your ideas, your political priorities under the guise of climate change. And anybody who argues it is like arguing gravity. Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I'm anti-gravity. Like, the Democrats support gravity, and the gravity back ends their entire patronage network. Like you can't argue with it because it's a fact. It's a law of the universe. But they captured that law of the universe and they politicized it. And so this truth that the climate does change now becomes, and if the climate changes, that means therefore all the prescriptions of the Democratic Party, all of their legislation, all of their payoffs to their patronage network, all of these things are justified because you agreed with this simple scientific truth that can't be denied.
Yeah, and it's interesting I understand most people won't do this, but the people steering that narrative, the save the planet, there's always a eugenics feel to what they're trying to impose. There's too many people, and you hear it from, I would say it's not your average leftist walking down the street that wants, half the population to die off, although I hope not at least. But there's something I've always thought was interesting is the person that says there's too many people in the world, we need to save the environment. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you start with yourself? I know that sounds almost macabre or evil, but it feels like if you really think that, what are you doing here kind of thing? But it's always like this elitist feel like, well, I mean, these other people need to go. Do you ever see that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's 100% the case. It's prescriptions for everyone else, which is why the actual substance of the argument is almost immaterial, right? Because they're not really making arguments on how to alter what might be man-made impacts on the climate. Like, I am more than willing to consider the idea that pollution is bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I am more than willing to say that, like you said, I think there is a real problem because of the framing. A lot of people on the right automatically have this knee-jerk, you like you said, vice signaling is a good phrase. Because the problem is actually not virtue signaling. This is another huge linguistic problem I have with the right. There is nothing wrong with virtue or the signaling of it, the desire to be virtuous, the desire for others to be virtuous. The problem is that it wasn't virtuous. The problem was the virtues in question. Yes. And so there's nothing wrong with people being moral. There's nothing wrong with people pursuing virtue. What you have, and this is the thing that we run into time and time again that no one wants to admit, what we have is a difference of moral vision. What we have is a definitive, unfortunately, friend-enemy distinction that it runs along the lines of moral vision. And because the moral visions are completely distinct and separate, the things that are virtue on one side are vice on the other. But it does create this scenario like you're talking about where a lot of people are just like, oh, well, fine. It doesn't matter if we, burn out all the resources of, of the world because, we're just the other guys. So that's what we do. Right. But yeah, I'm 100% behind hearing arguments as to why we should be thoughtful about the way we treat the earth and preserve, part of conservatism should be conservation. But we all understand implicitly that's not what climate change means, right? Right. The right is absolutely correct to be very wary of embracing the left and agreeing with the left on those terms because they know that behind that charge is everything of the leftist project. And just like the term racism, right? Yes. Like you should actually treat people well. Yeah. You should not be bad to people based on the race. That is a true thing. That is a Christian truth. However, behind that charge are a million things that the left actually wants to do that have nothing to do with your Christian faith or the way you should treat people and has everything to do with advancing their agenda. But they hide it all behind those magical words. Yes.
And I thought it was interesting that you did bring up the magical word thing. Orwell had an essay, obviously years ago, called Politics in the English Language, and he focused on how there's basically, I guess, as the distributist is calling it, magical words or meaningless words. Words have fascism, democracy, and it's funny that these are the words that get kind of tossed around in popular, culture at this point and argued over. and used so powerfully, well, you're against democracy. Without really, it's like, well, I guess I actually am, but you're saying that like it's a pejorative, and therefore I become the reactionary, and I'm pushing back against. It's almost like a battle you can't win because of these meaningless words: racism, climate change, democracy, insurrection at this point. And can you talk a little bit about these meaningless words and why, despite having no meaning, they're actually very powerful?
Yeah, like I said, they serve as shibboleths, right? They serve as kind of this flag planted in the ground saying, "This is where we stand. This is my team. We have captured this ground, and we now own this rhetorical space." So one of my favorite things to do on Twitter is to say things like, "What does democracy mean in this sentence?" Right? Because if you read what people are saying, like there was just yesterday's story came out about how Germany's wants to ban one of their most popular political parties because it has wrong ideas, right? We see this in America right now. We have to imprison the opposing political candidate of the Republican Party to make sure that we save democracy. So what does democracy really mean, right? Instead of just arguing, "Oh, this isn't democratic," instead of stepping into that frame and say, taking on, what they're already asserting, ask, what does that mean? If you're banning political candidates, if you're, banning opposition, if you're throwing people who make memes in jail, what is democracy?
Right.
Like, well, what does that actually produce? Because then it's about them defining the term, and they don't want to define the term. The term is not to be defined. That's the whole point of the magical word, is for it to have no definition, for it to be contentless in the actual fact, but full, pregnant, exploding with political implications and meaning. And so by constantly advancing those words, they never have to define their terms. They never have to defend themselves rhetorically. They can just basically lob these accusations. Basically, you hate humanity. You're against the people. That's what all of these terms eventually come down to.
Do you think it's a blind spot on our side to try to point out the reality as like, you don't actually care about climate change. If you did, you'd want nuclear power. You don't actually care about racism because if you did, you would take away these affirmative action programs that hurt certain races. Is it a failure or a blind spot on our side to try to point out the logic in these?
So I think there's like a twofold thing here. So I often go with Adrian Vermeule's, it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy, because I feel like that cuts through a lot of that for people to understand something. So I think but some people take it too far and they say we shouldn't bother explaining why the left is wrong. I think that's too far the other way. Okay. I think there is always value in pointing out to some extent where the hypocrisy is, where the lies are, where the logical fallacies are. You need to have that basic level, right? That needs to exist. You need to have that level, that foundation of truth. But you can't just sit there with that foundation of truth and expect it to change the way people actually behave. So if I confront someone on the left and they're wielding a sword against me and they're winning the battle, and I'm like, but I don't have a sword. I should not, that might be true. That might be useful to the people watching to realize this guy is like committing a crime by like swinging a sword at me. But I should not expect the guy swinging the sword to stop just because I point out the inequity of his possession of the sword or the heinousness of his assault, right? Like maybe that'll help me later in the court of public opinion. Maybe that'll help me out, when a court defense or something. But at the moment, I have to defend myself, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way the right needs to look at this. It's still valuable to have that foundation of truth and explain those things and make the situation clear. But at some point, we have to go to the next step, right? And this is where I think people like Rufo understand things that like the National Review and people are still twiddling their thumbs about is no, we need to actively pass legislation. We need to actively, engage in lawfare. We need to bring lawsuits. We need to build organizations that will fight back against this stuff. We need to, enshrine freedoms and protections in the law. We need to create a mechanism of defense and hopefully eventually attack against the people who are swinging a sword at us. We can't just sit there and be like, but the sword is bad. You should really put it down so we can all get back to boxing or whatever, virtuous combat we were supposed to have. And it's okay to point it out, but then you need to take the next step. If you're just sitting there, you're pointing and sputtering, then you're not doing anything at all.
Do you ever see an issue with, I hate some of these terms, speaking of meaningless terms, maybe this isn't meaningless, but the quote unquote online right. Do you ever see an issue with them just throwing verbal bombs or being cruel and then backing off with no actual substance behind it? And of course we all see that with both sides here and there, but I mean, do you see it collectively ever on the right?
I mean, it's difficult. So that certainly exists, right? And that is a problem. But there's a bunch of there's a lot of problems with kind of the nature of discourse. So first is just online. Online is always going to be about throwing barbs. If you want to have real productive conversations, don't have them on Twitter. Sorry, but that's not what Twitter's for. Twitter is the Coliseum. People come there to see people bleed. That's just how that's just how Twitter works, right? And if you're the guy who is, expecting to get really valuable, in-depth conversations on Twitter, you're just doing Twitter wrong. Now, we can come off Twitter. We can make, I've done this, Glenn Greenwald, Chris Rufo. These are people I have disagreed with, Dave Smith. I publicly disagreed with these people on Twitter. And then we came off of Twitter and had very valuable conversations on each other's podcasts once we're in a room, right? Or not physically in a room, but we're having a conversation we're having now, and you're a real person, we can flesh out points. That's where real work gets done. The online posting sphere, that's not what that's for. Right. So in some ways, yes, there is a knee-jerk reaction, I think, on the online right to some things that they shouldn't. They get hostile over things that they shouldn't. They do it just to be transgressive or just to be, just because kind of that's the mode of conversation. And that is a problem. At the same time, a lot of that behavior is what got conversations started. There's a lot of people out there like Charlie Kirk who are saying things way different than a couple of years ago that I don't think would have ever had that perspective shift if they hadn't undergone some of that pressure. So I'm not advertising harassment or anything, but I'm just saying as a public figure, if you're going to put your opinions out there, you got to be willing to take some slings and arrows. And if something is hurting your feels real bad, maybe it's time to start thinking about whether there's some truth to it, right?
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have. And I think there's been a lot of change on the right because that happened.
Yeah, well put. Many of us are concerned about finding a safe place to live in the world, legally eliminating our tax bills so that we're not funding a war, especially a war that is closing down our church, to say the least, how awful that is. Well, Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, is hosting a free online event at expatmoneysummit.com. They are going to discuss things like, legally eliminating your tax bill, like I said, international wealth protection, second passports, offshore banking. It's going to be the largest offshore event in the world. Now check this out. You want to hear some speakers? First and foremost is one of my heroes, Ron Paul. The great Ron Paul will be speaking. But check this out. Peter Schiff will be speaking. The great Tom Woods will be speaking. Friend of the show, Tom Luongo, will be speaking. Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Jim Rogers, plus international lawyers, offshore precious metal dealers, foreign real estate experts, and much, much more. You can pick up a free ticket. That's free at expatmoneysummit.com. Again, it's Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, hosting a free online event. Pick your ticket up at expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show. You did some content on this, a broad topic. We can talk about banning books, but it's specifically, you had this tweet that I had seen, and I loved your content on it because I thought the same thing. And maybe because I'm from Austin, I no longer live there. I'm 30 minutes southeast, but these little, I think the audience will understand what we're talking about. These little, it looks like a mailbox version of a library that people typically in white liberal areas will put in a front yard, and it's like free books. And it's always left wing. I've often had these ideas I've never followed through yet. At one point I had these ideas. I'm going to go put a bunch of libertarian economics books in there. And then it became, I'm going to go put some right-wing books in there. And now I'm thinking, I'm going to go put some Orthodox Church Fathers books in there. I've never done any of that. It's just things that cross my mind. But again, the left is so good at controlling even things like that. And the tweet that was on about it that you and I both saw, something along the lines of, I'm so proud of all of these banned books. And you hear that. I remember, it seems like when Trump got elected, there was this push where like Amazon was selling out of the book 1984 or something like that. And the narrative was that the left was all purchasing this because all of a sudden they're scared of this scenario playing out in 1984. And I just kept thinking, wait, you guys are the ones that want to push the scenarios playing out in Brave New World in 1984 in these books. And now they've got this whole push, this narrative control again, that we support not banning any books. And it's like, but the ones you're talking about, for one, they're referencing certain perverse books that were in schools for kids that, oh my God, how could you want that? If you want to get that out of schools, you're banning books, you bigots. But on the other hand, they're talking about the books they're talking about that they're pushing aren't really banned as far as I can tell. They're books, some of them, like To Kill a Mockingbird or something, I read that as assigned reading in high school.
Right.
And I guess I want to get your deeper thoughts on this whole issue because, again, it's kind of brilliant because they've got this posture like we're for freedom of speech, we're for not banning books, and it's so opposite of reality.
You notice actually that they almost never say they're for freedom of speech anymore, which is funny.
True, yeah.
Yeah. So once again, the magical words come in, right? So what used to be we're for free speech, right? We're for the right for free speech has now become we're against banning books, right?
Yeah.
It's very specific. It's a very specific thing that's, again, been hollowed out of content because like they're not against banning books at all. There are plenty of books that are almost impossible to buy. Try buying a copy of Camp of the Saints, right? Give it that your best shot. Like it's not going to be out there. So it's not banned in the sense that like, the state police are coming to arrest you for it, but they've just soft locked it out of pretty much any consumption in the mainstream. And there are tons of books like this. It's far from the only example. In fact, there are many librarians, public, librarians that like phase books that they don't like out of public libraries because they're too right-wing, they're too traditional, they have bad ideas in them, and nobody says anything. There's no discussion over the topic. They don't say we're banning the book. They just limit access, and that's really the key in our new liberal democracies is we don't ban things, we just make it extremely hard to get a hold of them and demonize anybody who does. But for the left, they talk about this idea of banning books, and they've locked onto this because of DeSantis and others who don't want to have literally animated gay porn in children's libraries. Like, we just don't want a third grader to be able to walk up and take that book off the shelf and stare at it. Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. Again, just like everything that the religious right was terrified about in the 1980s, 100% came true.
Right.
Like that'll never happen. Like that's exactly what happened, and everybody knew why, and we just don't want to talk about it. And so these books exist, and they just don't want them to be in children's libraries. You can still buy them. You can still you can still consume them if that's your thing. You just can't give it to a third grader off a library shelf at school. But the narrative of banning books is what they want. They want that idea that they're the ones that are held back, and so they're the ones. And so what do they immediately do? They say, well, we're going to get all the banned books. So what do? They go out and get all these books that were at some point ever, if one county somewhere in Mississippi in 1923 banned that book, now it's a banned book. And so they do things like Kill the Mockingbird in 1984 and all this stuff that, again, like you said, I was assigned by the state to read. I was forced by state employees to read these books. How bad can they be? They're literally, you can go to Amazon and buy them under the tab banned books.
Yes. And it's rare to go in a real bookstore these days, but when I've seen a banned books shelf.
Yes.
And it's by its very nature, it seems like no one would question, well, yeah, these are banned books. How are you buying them? Why are they here?
Here I am standing in the lobby of this multinational corporation, and there's a massive pile of books I can pick up for like $8 that were banned. Okay. And so there's so many of these, and it's absolutely ridiculous. They're ones that are obviously the safest books you could ever imagine.
Yes.
But the more amazing thing about it is, the things like 1984 are always at the front of it. And the wild thing about 1984 is apparently totalitarians can read it and totally see themselves as the good guys.
Yes.
As the oppressed guys in You Are Winston somehow. But they, specifically in 1984, the story is about a man who alters history, right? Literally his job is to go in there and change the headlines, alter what is true, what the people can read. The left is doing that right now. They are literally changing books, changing movies, changing fairy tales, changing the core stories and traditions of our society and updating them to the current government mandated, slop that people have to believe. And so they take a book and they say, oh, this was a banned book. I'm going to read it because it was a banned book, very transgressive. And then they do literally the thing that the bad guys make the guy do in the book, and they think they're the good guys. So it's very clear they don't care about banning books. It's just a symbol. It's this hollowed out magical phrase that means these guys are the bad guys. And even though they're actively taking steps to do exactly what the banned book says they're not supposed to do, they're the good guys because they wield the phrase.
Yes, and things like the 1619 Project are exactly what you're saying. They can come in and then they get to use, of course, another magical term, racism, and wrap it all up in this, the history that we've been taught is not true. This is the 1619 Project. It's pushed by ironically, some of the biggest multinational corporations on the planet, ruled by a lot of white people. But things like the 1619 Project are literally, in a sense, banning history as we have learned it up to this point.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the case again. And I mean, we just look at what Disney, Snow White can no longer be white anymore, though that's literally the name of it. And the prince can't save her because obviously we don't do that anymore. Roald Dahl and all of his books were being, stealth edited. New editions were being put out where they removed the fact that fat children weren't glorified. Like it was a bad thing that Augustus Gloop was scarfing down chocolate bars and making a kind of an ugly mess of himself. Like they're changing all of the things that gave these works cultural meaning and significance, that tied them to traditions, that put them in a historical place. I mean, look at The Little Mermaid. It was already a fairy tale that was hollowed out by Disney in the first place,
right?
Because in the original one, like the Little Mermaid dies, and she pays a price for basically abandoning her father and her family, and wanting to leave, and like that all got scrubbed out for the original movie, but that was still too traditional because I guess like a prince cared about her and gave her voice back and these kind of things. And so they had to subvert it again and again and again. Of course, the colors have to change, the races have to change, everything has to change. All this stuff has to be, we've always been at war with, Eurasia, whatever. Like they have to constantly change everything from the past to update this. Again, exactly like the evil people in the book they say they're reading.
Yes.
But they don't care because, it's fine. It's the same. It's like, what's the Margaret Atwood book? The Handmaid's Tale, right? This is one of these other ones that's a banned book in here.
Right.
Obviously the silliest thing in the world to compare it to modern day Christianity, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if they're in many ways taking on the attitudes of the evil people in the books. They're just stand-ins for like the white straight Christian males they don't like, and that's all that really matters. It doesn't matter what the actual content or morality of the book is, as long as you're just aimed at hating the right people. That's the only thing that really they care about.
And to your point about the movies changing, there's this other narrative. It's like that the left, that's the group that creates art and beauty, and the right, they just want to destroy all of these good, beautiful things. They're against the environment and such. But again, if you take the scales off your eyes and watch things, it seems to me that the left is the biggest group that's destroying things. They don't want borders. They don't want laws. They want laws that basically disallow differentiation between men and women. Again, tearing down borders, tearing down things as they exist, changing old art to update it to now. It seems to me like they don't create as much as they tear down.
Have you noticed that all of a sudden, all of our entertainment basically has the same quality as a 1980s after school special?
Yes. Yes.
Like
It's almost like in the writing rooms, there's no more analysis or careful editing or something, because no one wants to say that's not good anymore. They just, let's check the script. Oh, that's great. And I don't know if it's a lower education level, the people reviewing these things, or there's a purpose behind it and they're doing it on purpose. It's bizarre though.
I mean, what's left to say, right? Like our culture for the last how many decades has basically just been about subverting Christianity, about subverting American history. Every single show, every single movie, every single book is about taking that which was heroic, the good, the beautiful, the true, and destroying it, right? And there is, to be fair, some great art that can be made there, right? So we did get works of cultural significance in that, in that environment for a while. But when that's the only way that you know how to interact with kind of the original culture of your nation, then you're eventually just going to suck all of the marrow out of that bone, right? You already killed the Christian culture. You've already scraped all the flesh off of it. And now you're just trying to, gnaw the last few bits of marrow out of it. And so of course your art's going to fall apart. Yeah, maybe you got some interesting subversion back when you were like, taking something that was like a robust transition or a tradition and showing some of its inadequacies or some of its shortcomings. But now there's none of that left. And then you can't create a new tradition because the thing you're doing is just pure subversion. So the other thing left to do is to just burn yourself out and just become these hectoring school marms with nothing better to do than chase these empty inversions of actual morality.
Yes. It's like early punk rock was so good because it was an actual rebellion against the establishment, let's say. And then the last few years, I think you know some of these figures like Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys and whatnot. You've got these guys pushing, I have to be careful, no more strikes. I'm clear of them so far. Pushing things like masking and the shot. And it's like, wasn't punk rock like subverting the establishment, the regime? And now, like you said, I guess they did all that they can do, and now they're pushing it. It's the weirdest thing. I remember Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols and PIL was wearing a MAGA hat, and punk rock fans were so upset. And it's like, it's Johnny Rotten. All he's ever done is piss people off. Sid Vicious had a swastika on his shirt, and you've listened to that music for years, and now he puts a MAGA hat on, Johnny Rotten does, and oh my God, how dare you? It's the weirdest transition over time.
Yeah, all these kids with Misfits shirts wearing them now would never actually listen to the Misfits, I think, at this point, right?
Yes.
But yeah, no, you go to a rock show, you go to these things, and now the first thing that you see is like a sign like, no homophobes in here.
Yes.
No, it's like, oh, so you and Walmart and Apple and Chase Manhattan have the same morality, and none of that matters to these people. It doesn't make sense. It's because, and that's the thing that's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to understand. Subversion was never. We have this story about how subversion is just part of America, or is part of youth culture or something. And I think that's because a lot of people went through a period in which subversion became the majority kind of mass media mode, right? That was the way it happened. I don't think that's like true universally, actually. I think you just grew up in a time in which, so like a lot of people think, teenagers start rebelling when they get older. But what actually happens is teenagers just notice another social hierarchy, right? When you're young, the only social hierarchy is your family. It's the only thing that you interact with. It's the only value you can really assign to your place in it. But once you start, going to school, you have outside influences, you start getting a little bit of idea of like, oh no, there are other social hierarchies out there, and maybe I care more about my standing in those social hierarchies than I do my own. And what are their values? Oh, they're different to my parents. So what's the best way to attain status in the social. So this is not complete rejection of authority. It's actually just embracing of a different authority. It's embracing of a different social hierarchy. And so I think that's what a lot of people look at. So when they looked at things like punk, they thought punk was about rebellion, or they thought all these things were about fighting the hierarchy. They weren't. They were about dismantling a very specific hierarchy, one that was different than what was now ascending into the mainstream. But now that thing is mainstream. And so that's why all these rebellious people now line up with all these corporations, because they actually always shared the same values and they never cared about fighting the hierarchy.
Yeah, well put. We talked about early on, your content is getting spread to a much larger audience now, and I'm so happy about that. Have you received any different sort of pushback? I assume the Auron MacIntyre of, let's say, 2 years ago might get jabs thrown at him from the left or some, left-wing Twitter anons or something like that. As your content has expanded, is there any certain pushback that's different than you were used to?
Every once in a while I hear, okay, well, now that you're on a big platform, you can't possibly be legitimate. You can't possibly be real. Punk rock, you've sold out, that kind of thing. If you have any level of success. But in general,
you're Green Day now. You're Green Day.
Exactly, right. Yeah, they're playing your stuff on the radio, so it must be garbage. But honestly, in general, it's been really welcoming. It's obviously a lot of the Blaze and many other people have kind of welcomed me with open arms, which has been amazing. They've been kind of excited and interested in what I've had to say. And a lot of the guys who were kind of listening to me when I had a smaller platform or, were engaged, they're just excited to see somebody who, is familiar with them and their concerns and their language getting to say things on a larger platform and having it. So I honestly, I mainly just get encouragement. Good. I mainly just get people who are excited about what's happening. There are haters, of course. It's the internet. It's don't read the comments, guys. I don't know what to tell you. People are mean. People are awful. They're going to say terrible things about you, but just, have conviction to, and try to focus on the positive thing, because there's a lot of people who are excited about what you're doing. So
yeah, good. Were you at that event? I'm pretty sure I saw you at that event where Tucker basically took down some of the Republican quote unquote nominees. Were you at that?
Yeah, I was doing the Blaze commentary in Iowa. Yeah.
Yeah. What is Tucker a kingmaker at this point to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a section of the party that I think is now very keyed into Tucker Carlson. He obviously has his finger on the pulse of kind of the populist wing of the party and has a very good ability to spread that to others. Obviously, his time on Fox News is over, but it was invaluable in making sure that a much wider audience got, they felt emotionally what Trump was, but they didn't understand, I think, and linked that to a wider sphere of policy, what's happening in the world, foreign policy. They didn't graft that onto a wider framework of political belief. They knew something was wrong. They knew Trump was speaking against it, but they still had lagging beliefs of neocons and all this stuff that had been kicking around for a long time.
Yes.
And so Tucker was able to kind of come behind and backfill the kind of ideological and worldview perspectives that kind of undergird that kind of raw nerve that Trump was touching on when he was doing his thing. And so while I don't know what's going to happen with Trump, and I don't know if Tucker's going to continue to just do his thing on Twitter or he's going to find a new place, I do know that Tucker is still, I think, sitting kind of at the heart of a significant portion of kind of the conservative media sphere, and that's really essential.
Yes, it seems to me like he ended the political careers of Pence, Hutchinson, and maybe Tim Scott as well. Tim Scott's a little bit of a wild card in that realm, but the other guys.
Yes, Scott. So say what you will about Tim Scott. It felt like Tim Scott at least shared the values of the people in the room.
Yes,
he was awkward. He didn't have the right answers for a number of things. Tucker certainly put him on the defensive because he was just not. He should have been prepared for those things. But at the very least, it felt like Tim Scott and the people in the room had similar values, as were Pence and Hutchinson were just completely clueless, which was just amazing. Yeah, they ended their runs right there in front of everybody.
Yep. Okay, you just alluded to something, but in closing here, 3 we don't have to call them predictions, but let's say guesses. The Republican nominee in 2024, the Democrat nominee in 2024, and the Republican VP candidate, if you had to guess.
Yeah, let's see. All right, so always dangerous.
Yes.
I'm so obviously huge, tectonic, possibly republic ending implications for Trump's current situation. But if Trump is legally allowed to be the nominee, he will be.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's anyone who's going to catch him. I think that DeSantis is a very capable guy. I wish he would have understood the facts on the ground and kept his powder dry for next time. But someone whispers in your ear, you can be Caesar. It's really hard to refuse the purple, and then he kind of fell into that. I think because of that, he would have been like one of the obvious VP pickups, but obviously that's not going to happen now, given what could be there. I mean, I think like Ramaswamy is somebody a lot of people are looking at, but I think that he still is not in a place. He doesn't bring a state, which is really what the VP is supposed to do in many scenarios. Because he doesn't have the governorship, he can't bring a swing state with him. And so I don't know that even though he's playing the field well, he's a smart guy, he's well spoken. I don't know that he would get a VP shot. You could probably see someone like Tim Scott step into that role, because again, like while he might be awkward in certain scenarios, vice president, that doesn't matter so much. He brings a state with him, and I think he does shore up the evangelical vote, which is what Pence did originally. Obviously, there are identity politic issues there that will also be key to that decision. But I think that's a possibility. So I'm not as confident with my VP as I am with my presidential pick. But I would say that's a possibility. And then I really think that the Democrats are going to run Biden again.
Okay.
As amazing as that would be, they might switch to Newsom. There is a possibility that they're teeing up Hunter right now so they can eventually kind of make the prosecution of Trump and the prosecution of Hunter like simultaneous, and that's okay. So they can feed Biden to the machine, and then they can pivot over somebody like Newsom to fill that. But I think that getting rid of a president is a sign of weakness. And I think they know that, even as cartoonish as the Biden presidency is, I think they will try to hold on to that if they can. Though I think somebody like Newsom would kind of be their backup if they need to feed Biden to the crowd to justify their attacks on Trump.
Boy, a Tim Scott versus Kamala Harris debate. How amazing would that be?
You start to understand how those late imperial. So you're like, how would anyone put somebody who would name a horse consul in power? Oh, okay, nope, I get it. It makes sense now. Yep,
right. Oren, plug away all of your work, your Twitter, anything you'd like.
Yeah, of course. Auron MacIntyre with a U on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, Substack. And of course, all of my stuff is over on The Blaze. So you can watch everything on Blaze TV and read my columns at the Blaze website. And then I've got the podcast, of course, if you want to just get the audio at Auron MacIntyre Show.
Excellent. Auron, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Auron MacIntyre. I did want to tell you, I'm going to be at an event in Tobaccoville, North Carolina on Saturday, September 16th. It is the Philip Ludwell III Orthodox Fellowship Conference, and it's going to be a good time. So you can go to southernorthodox.org and check out the details. There's going to be, for one, Father John Whiteford will be there. So I know a lot of y'all listening are fans of him, as am I. So Dissident Mama, Rebecca, is putting it on. And so it's going to be a good time. Again, go to southernorthodox.org to check it out. As for this show, counterflowpodcast.com, you know all the links. Go to the YouTube page, hit subscribe, and hopefully you guys watch these as they always premiere live on YouTube Tuesday evenings, usually at 7 p.m. Central Time. I'm always in the chat, the live chat, having a good time with everyone watching. So maybe we'll be doing that right now. Until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, like on the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.